Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today we're continuing our journey into the many works of Junji Ito as I explain every one of his stories. This video we're going to look at Mimi's Tales of Terror, which is a collection of stories based on Japanese urban legends, all starring Mimi. We'll also be walking through Black Paradox, a slightly longer tale about four strangers and their interactions with the spirit world. You know the drill at this point, let's just get into the video. This is every single Junji Ito manga explained, part 8. Alright, so let's get into Mimi's Tales of Terror. We start off with a really short and sweet one here on the utility pole. Mimi and her boyfriend Naoto are driving down the road when she thinks she spots something on top of a nearby utility pole. As they look closer, they see a creepy ass old lady standing on top of it, and next thing they know, wham, she's staring through the windshield. They jump out of the car in a panic, but find that the lady has completely vanished. And that's all there is for this one. Next is the woman next door. In this story, Mimi is getting fed up with her upstairs neighbor who keeps blaring loud music. She confronts the guy and he says he doesn't think it's that loud. In fact, the lady that lives in the unit next to him never complains, so he accuses Mimi of just being sensitive. She walks over to the unit next door to see if the woman will back her up about the music, but I guess she's not home. The man says that the woman that lives there is actually quite strange, as she never seems to make any noise and he barely notices her except that she leaves every once in a while. Just then, the lady does start leaving her apartment and she's definitely strange, wearing all black and covering her body completely. Another neighbor down the hall pops out and asks what all the fuss is about. Mimi tries to get this lady to back her up, but she says she's so far down the hall that she doesn't really notice the music. She does mention how strange the woman next door is. In fact, she says she believes it to be sisters because although they all dress the same, they seem to be various heights. The next day, Mimi's coming back home and spots the man from upstairs sitting outside, visibly shaking. He's freaking out about the women in black who live next door to him, and speak of the devil, a particularly tall woman walks right past them and up the stairs. That night, Mimi hears what sounds like the man yelling in terror, and the next day, he packs up all of his belongings and leaves in a hurry. Mimi asks the landlord if she could move into his place, hoping that the second floor will be a little quieter. While moving her stuff upstairs, she sees one of the women drop a bag of groceries and helps her pick it up. However, the woman just ignores the groceries and begins to head into her apartment without them. Mimi tries to stop her and grabs the woman's arm and finds out that it's made of flat metal. Later, she discusses with her friends about what the hell that was all about, and they decide it must have been some kind of brace or prosthetic. That night, Mimi discovers a hole in her wall. She peeks through and finds the woman next door. Both of her arms are exposed this time and seem to be metal. The woman begins pulling out the screws from her metal arms, and as she does, they begin to extend. She does the same for her metallic legs, and just then she looks directly at Mimi, moving in close, looking right through the peephole, which is absolutely terrifying. Mimi jumps back, but soon an extended piece of metal comes through the hole and rapidly whips around the room before finally going away. Mimi realizes it wasn't multiple women, but rather the same woman shifting height with her extendable metal limbs, if she's even human at all. Mimi moves her bookcase in front of the hole and afterwards hears the neighbor leave her apartment. She looks out the window to see if the lady left, only to find that the woman is standing outside of her window and starts reaching in. As the woman lets out a sinister laugh, Mimi passes out. The next day, she says she plans on moving out as soon as possible. Next is Rustling in the Grass. Mimi and her boyfriend Naoto are having a nice walk through the woods when they suddenly hear a rustling in the grass. They investigate the sound to find the body of a woman hanging from a tree. One of the dead woman's shoes has fallen off and they assume this to be the sound they heard. The two decide that they should at least get her body down so that she can rest in peace, but they can't find a way to get to her. In fact, they question how the woman did this to herself at all, considering there's nothing for her to climb on. They begin to hear the noise again, as if pieces of the woman's body are falling into the grass, but they don't actually see anything. At the same time, the body seems to have turned to face them. They hear the sound once again, and this time spot strange translucent objects falling from the woman. They run away and note that the corpse's gaze seemed to follow them as they run. Grave placement. In this story, Mimi has moved into a new apartment building, which is pretty nice for the price. The problem is, the reason that the rent's so cheap is because there's a huge graveyard right outside the balcony. Naoto comes over to check the place out, and the two wander through the graveyard. Mimi's a little freaked out by what looks like a grave mound in the middle. That night, Mimi has trouble sleeping, thinking about the grave mound, which seemed fresh, and she begins hearing a strange noise coming from the cemetery. The next morning, she looks out of her balcony, wondering what the hell the sound was, and finds her neighbor working out next door. He says he didn't hear anything last night. Weird. Mimi investigates the cemetery and notices one of the gravestones has been slightly twisted. After this, she says she hears the noises every night. One night she peeks out the window and spots a Hirudama, a fire-like wisp that is said to be a human soul. Naoto dismisses this, saying it must just be smoke or something. They check out the cemetery together and find that more of the gravestones have been adjusted. And when they look out of Mimi's balcony, they see all the gravestones are actually turned towards the apartment. They also spot her buff neighbor flexing his heart out on his balcony toward the graves. That night they watch the Hirudama fly about the cemetery when they spot the neighbor out back moving the graves. I guess it was this beefcake the whole time. Naoto starts yelling at the guy, which startles him and he falls over. They go see what happened and find that the muscle dude has fallen onto the burial mound and is actually on top of a corpse. The cops come and pick the guy up for questioning. Meanwhile, the community spends the entire day turning all the gravestones back in place. Naoto and Mimi reflect on the incident and then notice the neighbor is already back and walking into his apartment. Later, Mimi finds him on his balcony again and he says that the police really gave him a hard time, but it just felt so good to have all those eyes on him. He says the spirits of the gravestones watching him gives him a real high. That night, the guy is back at it again, turning the gravestones. Mimi watches him from her window and this time she notices faces within the graves. In a creepy ass 2-pager, we see hundreds of ghastly faces staring at her. It appears this is the audience of souls the neighbor was talking about. The community is pissed at the guy for doing this again and he's forced to move out of the area. Mimi says that once again they turn the gravestones back, but there are still a few that they missed, and even now they look in her direction. That's pretty creepy, man. Speaking of creepy, have you ever been casually scrolling online when suddenly you're bombarded with a million ads, or worse, get hit with a malware attack? Yeah, it's a nightmare. If you've never heard of a VPN, it's a tool that keeps your online activity secure by encrypting your connection. And today's sponsor, Surfshark, has got your back. It doesn't just protect you, it makes the whole internet experience better. Surfshark uses top-grade encryption to keep your data secure, protecting you from hackers and trackers. Whether you're browsing, streaming, or shopping, you can do it all worry-free. Surfshark's user-friendly privacy and security solutions protect your devices from viruses, malware, and keep sensitive info, like your credit card and email, safe even when using public Wi-Fi. And not to mention, Surfshark gives you fast, secure access to blocked content, so you can enjoy whatever you want without worrying about tracking or censorship. Recently, I was in the mood for some early 2000s J-horror and wanted to rewatch One Missed Call, but it wasn't available on Netflix in my region. With just a few clicks, I connected to a Japanese server using Surfshark. It only took a few seconds, and suddenly One Missed Call and many other region-locked horror films were instantly available. With unlimited devices on one account, 3,200 plus servers in over 100 countries, and 24/7 customer support, Surfshark is your internet security sidekick, always ready for action. You can try Surfshark today risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Click the link below or head to surfshark.com/grief to get up to 4 extra months on your plan. Now back to Mimi's Tales of Terror with Seashore. Mimi, Naoto, and some friends are excited to spend the day at the beach, but Mimi's not feeling too hot. She's worried another strange event may occur. The crew decides to take a nap while they wait for the sunrise before they go surfing. Mimi wakes up from her nap to see a figure walking up from the beach. As it moves into the light, it appears to be a disgusting rotted corpse. It's pretty gross with some of its entrails hanging out of its body. She wakes up the guys, but of course the zombie is gone. Later, Naoto and Mimi have a bite to eat at a restaurant that's on the shore. Mimi's still trying to convince Naoto that what she saw was real when a pretty waitress walks up and says that she believes her story. The waitress says she sees these souls all the time and it's due to the many people who have drowned over the years on the beach. The rest of the gang, Furusawa and Tanaka, take a break from surfing and join them. Furusawa gets eyes on the hot waitress and decides he's going to try to hit on her, to the amusement of the others. To everyone's surprise, he actually convinces the waitress to hang out with them a bit and they all take pictures together on the beach. Then the waitress starts talking about the afterlife. She says Kurosawa should take care because she can see lost souls all around him. Then she just walks away, leaving everyone sufficiently creeped out. That night, Kurosawa is seeming a little off and says he's not feeling well. Then he begins frantically running into the water. He would have drowned if it wasn't for Naoto dragging him back to shore. Furusawa screams at them, "How can you all sit there when there are children drowning out there?" He points out to the sea, but it's completely empty. He can't believe they aren't seeing what he's seeing and says there are more kids' bodies piled up on the pier. Man, that's pretty eerie, I gotta say. The others force him into the car, hoping to leave, but decide to wait till morning when it's light out. Unfortunately, when they wake up, Furusawa is missing, and after a brief search, they find his dead body washed ashore. The waitress appears, saying she knew it would end this way. She says that a long time ago, a group of preschoolers were swallowed up by the waves and drowned along with their teacher. A few days later, as the group group mourns their friend, Naoto asks if Tanaka ever developed the photos they took on the beach. He reluctantly shows them the photos and they reveal something disturbing. In all of the pictures of Furusawa, he is surrounded by dozens of twisted souls, the spirits of the toddlers who died. Definitely one of the most haunting images I've seen in a while. They notice the pictures of the waitress are missing, and when Naoto asks what happened, Tanaka just freaks out. He says he burned them and he won't explain what he saw in them, only that he wants to forget about it. Man, if he didn't burn the photos of Furusawa, I can't imagine what the photos of the waitress held. Just the two of us. This one starts off pretty intense with a woman standing in a parking lot and setting herself on fire. Yeah, pretty crazy way to kick this one off, and the art is just awesome. We then see Mimi. Apparently she's traveled back home and this is her first visit in a while. She finds her little sister Hana and another little girl she doesn't recognize. The girl's name is Kei and she is supposedly the daughter of a friend of Mimi's father. Some domestic issues happened and they're watching her for now. Problem is, Mimi's parents just reopened their bakery after some renovations and are pretty busy, so they left Kei with Hana, who's had about enough of her. She ditches Kei with Mimi, who quickly learns why. Kei is very clingy, constantly crying and grabbing her. When Mimi leaves her for just a couple of moments to use the restroom, Kei screams her head off. Mimi's finally fed up and meets her parents in the bakery to try and leave Kei with them, but they're really busy and ask Mimi to continue watching her. They also notice that Kei's face has gotten all dirty somehow. Later, Hana is freaking out over a huge mess. Someone left dirty black tracks down the hall. She blames Kei, but when they check her feet, they're all clean. Plus, she hasn't left Mimi's side all day, something Hana has jealously taken note of. She says Kei's been stuck to Mimi like goldfish poop. Not gonna lie, that one made me laugh. Mimi's mother fills them in on Kei, explaining that the reason they're watching her is because her mother suddenly passed away, and Kei doesn't know yet. Pretty sad. That night, Mimi and Kei share a bed. Mimi asks her why she's so afraid to be alone, and Kei tells her that there's always a scary shadow person standing right next to her, and she doesn't want to be alone with them. Then a dirty handprint appears on Kei's cheek. Now that's creepy. After Kei falls asleep, Mimi talks to her parents about the odd situation, and they tell her that Kei's mother actually died by setting herself on fire. When Mimi returns to her room, she sees a dark humanoid hovering over the bed with Kei. Talk about a sleep demon. The entity wipes the tears from Kei's eyes, and we get a better look at it, revealing the person to look something like a charred corpse. Kei wakes up to see the burnt face right next to hers, and of course she just freaks out. The corpse then begins to make its way toward the two in a terrifying manner. Mimi cries out to her parents, but of course when they all look in the room, the creature is nowhere to be seen. Although Kei seems to still see the entity. Not knowing what else to do, they call in an exorcist to purge the spirit from the house. The priest performs a purification ritual that lasts hours and seemingly knocks the entity around the room, covering the house and bakery in soot. This goes on for hours and is quite a struggle, but eventually the spirit subsides, finally resting in peace. Mimi's parents look at the mess and decide maybe they need to do another renovation. In the final panel, we learn that Kei grew up to live a happy life. A rare happy ending for a Junji Ito story. Scarlet Circle. This one starts with Mimi and Naoto having a huge argument about the supernatural. Mimi declares the spirit world to be very real, and Naoto, like usual, dismisses the notion. Mimi's finally had enough of his skepticism and says she wants to break up. Third wheel, Misa, is just standing there the whole time, and afterwards she tells Mimi that she's on her side. The supernatural phenomenon is absolutely real, and in fact, she's experienced some strange things lately. She leads Mimi to her grandparents' house that's now in shambles. There's a big hole in the middle of the house with a rope ladder leading down to a small room. It seems like a normal room with floor mats and everything, only it's very small with no doors, and a faint red circle is on the wall. Misa explains that the house was falling apart and her uncle decided to help her grandparents rebuild it, but while working on it, her uncle and grandpa found the strange room. Her grandpa believed the red circle to be some kind of sacred symbol and refused to tear it down, even going so far as to shut himself in the room. But her grandpa never re-emerged. In fact, he completely vanished. A few days later, her grandmother disappeared as well. Misa's uncle showed her the place then, and the two noticed that the Scarlet Circle seemed to get darker after her grandparents vanished. Her uncle vowed to discover what was going on, but then he went missing as well. Sure enough, the circle grew darker, and Misa believes it's connected to the disappearances. A few days pass, and Mimi still seems pretty mad at Naoto. Misa tells her that she discovered something in the dark room and wants to show her, together. When they get to the hole, Misa asks if Mimi can see something down there. Once Mimi's looking into the hole, however, Misa pushes her in and pulls up the ladder. She says she lied about finding anything, and in reality, she's hoping Mimi will vanish as well. Shortly after, we see why. When Misa tells Naoto that she's always had a crush on him, and now that Mimi and him have broken up, she thought maybe they could be together. Meanwhile, Mimi attempts to escape the room, and soon notices that the red circle is growing larger, consuming the entire room. She screams, and somehow Naoto can sense something is wrong. Distracting him from his conversation with Misa, he shrugs it off, and the red mass continues to fill the room, almost covering Mimi. Then, at the last minute, Naoto arrives and pulls her out. He says he just couldn't shake the feeling that he heard her voice and began to run toward it. The couple has reunited, and as they leave the house, they see Misa sulking in the corner. Mimi then says that no one ever saw Misa again, and that the room was filled in and covered with dirt. And last but not least, sign in the field. We started with a short one, let's end it on a short one. Mimi says she missed the bus and had to walk to the station. She takes a shortcut through a rice field, and as it gets dark, she spots a sign on the path. There's nothing special about the sign itself, but looking past it, it appears the sign's shadow is taking the shape of a humanoid entity. Mimi screams and runs, returning a few days later with Naoto to show him what she saw. But this time, the sign's shadow is simply the normal rectangular shape of the sign. And that wraps up Mimi's Tales of Terror. Now let's move into Black Paradox. Like I said in the intro, this is a slightly longer story, and man does it take some twists and turns. So let's get into it. A group of strangers wearing all black meet for the first time in public. Two males, Taburo and Piton, and two females, Barachi and Maruso. They introduce themselves using these code names and then get into a car together saying that they're journeying to paradise. Apparently the group met on a website called Black Paradox, which Toburo calls a suicide site. It seems these people have all met up together to die. Each of them explains why they want to die, starting with Maruso. She says she doesn't have an exact reason, but more of a vague anxiety that seems to be following her. She feels that a series of disasters is going to befall her in the future, and she just can't bear it. Taburo says that a few months ago he saw his doppelganger. It was his exact double, and it terrified him. He says there's a theory that if you see your doppelganger, you'll soon die. So he figured he'd get ahead of it and just do it himself. Plus, he says the world's boring anyway. Piton says he has a similar reason for doing it. He says he specializes in robotics at his university, and his team decided to build the most advanced humanoid robot possible. He was used as the model for the robot, and the finished result was shocking. The android looked exactly like him. Piton felt that the robot was superior to him in every way, and he began to feel obsolete. So he plans to disappear before the team announces the robot to the public. Barachi says she has a similar story to both of them. When she looks in the mirror, she believes her reflections is telling her to die. She then shows them why her reflection haunts her. She pulls back the hair covering the left side of her face, and we see that she has a horrible disfigurement. Taburo comments that it seems the theme of their deaths is another me. They continue to drive, and a car comes cruising past them. Maruso looks out the window and sees the people in the car are doppelgangers of Piton, Taburo, and Barachi. The others don't quite believe what she saw. She mentions that Barachi's double looked the same, except her hair was covering the other side of her face. Barachi just laughs it off. Maruso then looks in the rearview mirror and sees only herself. Barachi doesn't have a reflection. They pull up to an isolated spot in the woods, and Piton begins attaching a hose to the exhaust pipe, as this is their decided method of death. Barachi begins to help him, and meanwhile, Maruso pulls Taburo aside. She uses a hand mirror to show him that Barachi has no reflection. They also notice that whenever Piton moves, they can hear the sound of motors, meaning that this must be Piton's robot creation. Taburo and Maruso are sufficiently freaked out and decide to run away quietly. They turn back, however, and find the doubles are chasing them. The Piton robot has pulled out a box cutter, and the image of the two chasing them is terrifying. Maruso trips and falls, but isn't going down without a fight. She picks up a rock and chucks it right into Barachi's face. Oddly, she completely shatters like glass. At the same time, Piton pounces on Taburo and stabs him in the face. But something's weird here. Taburo explodes into a dark mist, revealing that he wasn't human and likely a doppelganger as well. Maruso runs for her life and happens upon another car in the woods. It's the car of the doppelgangers. They're inside waiting to die from the exhaust when Maruso and Piton come up. Once the robot sees his human counterpart, he turns and runs. Turns out that these were the real people. They were wondering why Maruso never met up with them, and I guess she accidentally met with their doppelgangers instead. The chapter ends with the four people deciding to hold off on dying, and we learn that the whereabouts of the robot are unknown. Chapter 2 starts off with the gang heading off to the wilderness again on their second attempt at death. They have a discussion about whether they're actually real this time, and question whether they could ever be 100% 100% certain. This time they decide to take a bunch of sleeping pills since the car exhaust thing takes too long. They all lay on the ground waiting to die, but Maruso stands up asking, "How long are you willing to keep this up?" Taburo and Barachi both start to get up, and Maruso says, "I knew it, you were fakes." But the two explain that they actually just pretended to take the pills to see if the others were fake. I guess everyone's paranoid now. Piton, however, did take the pills and looks straight up dead, until he suddenly begins convulsing on the ground and pukes out a large sphere. His eyes are wide and he says he saw a dazzling world full of light before he came back to. The other three examine the pretty stone, and Barachi, having a history in jewelry, can identify what type of material it is. She says she wants to have it looked at by a friend and wonders if it has some connection to the mysterious world Piton saw while dead. So once again, the group postpones their suicide in order to find out more about the stone. Barachi holds the stone in her apartment. She closes her eyes, and for a brief moment, she sees a strange world filled with an infinite number of stones. She drops it on the ground and it begins to glow. Then a phantom begins to form from it. Next, we see Maruso, who appears to be a nurse in her everyday life. We learn her real name is Kikuchi, and she starts to help a doctor with a patient who just so happens to be Piton. She leads him to the exam room, and he doesn't realize it's her, but then again, his eyes are all white and glazed over. The doctor feeds a camera into Piton's stomach. As the camera descends, the doc says his stomach seems in perfect health. Then he moves on to the pylorus and suddenly screams in terror, knocking the equipment over and going completely mad. Piton just casually leaves while the doctor freaks out. What the hell did he see? Later, the gang has gotten together again to discuss the stone. Barachi says that the stone is incredibly valuable as it's made up of an unknown mineral. Taburo says they might as well have some fun with the money before they die, and Barachi says she could get her facial abscess fixed, which was her whole reason for dying in the first place. Maruso reminds them that technically the stone belongs to Piton, but he says he doesn't mind splitting the dough with them, especially since he's puked up a whole bag of them since. He says something's not right with his pylorus. Maruso tells them that pylorus is Greek for gatekeeper, and Barachi speculates that the dazzling world Piton saw was the afterlife, and when he came back to life, somehow a doorway was created through his stomach by the pylorus. She says that this is no mere stone, but possibly a soul. She explains that she even saw a spirit rise out from one. Suddenly, Piton starts puking uncontrollably. Dozens of stones start shooting out of his mouth, and his entire body starts filling with them, swelling up his face and belly in a truly grotesque fashion. As his stomach fills to a breaking point, there's a huge flash in the car, and the crew jumps out as hundreds of stones pour onto the ground. From the stones, spirits begin to rise up, and on the final page of the chapter, we see the disturbed souls filling the night air. Chapter 3 starts with a famous actor's blog. He says that an anonymous fan sent him an incredibly beautiful stone, and that it will be available to buy soon. After this, 2 of the stones were sold under the name Paradonite, which is theorized to mean paradise or heaven. Taburo, Barachi, and Maruso meet up again, and Taburo compliments Barachi on her marketing skills. Using a celebrity to drum up interest was a smart move. Maruso asks how they could be so cheerful when their friend Piton's stomach straight up exploded and they saw that terrifying vision. Apparently, Maruso took the car that night and drove Piton to the hospital, ditching the car outside of the emergency room. She has no idea what happened to him. Barachi says she really hopes he's okay because she wants more of the gems, and at this point Maruso is pretty pissed off at her and Taburo's greed, and she just storms off. Curious about what happened to Piton, Maruso calls the hospital and asks if a seriously injured man with a ruptured stomach came into their emergency room, but they say they have no record of such a patient. Later, Barachi and Taburo are scouring the area where Piton's stomach exploded, looking for more stones that they might have missed. While they search, they end up finding Piton. However, on closer inspection, it seems to actually be Piton's robot with dead batteries. They bring the robot back to Barachi's apartment and quickly hide it when her jeweler friend comes by. The jeweler says that he contacted the International Mineral Association and they want to officially make Paradonite a new mineral. He tells them to hold off on selling more until it's official. He also recommends breaking up the Paradonite into smaller pieces to be used in different kinds of jewelry. The only problem is the stones are extremely hard, even harder than diamond. Later, Taburo and Barachi try to break one of the stones with a hammer, but when Taburo strikes it, ghostly apparitions begin to fly out of it, swarming the room. The souls fly through them and even seem to pass through the robot. In the end, the room is covered in a strange ectoplasm-like substance. Taburo wakes Barachi up and she barely remembers who she is. She says she had a long dream that spanned many eras and different personalities. They examine the stone and find it's no longer shining as brightly. They then hear a noise coming from the closet and out comes the robot. He says, "Hurry and die, we'll die together," and his eyes are all wonky. It's really freaky. The robot makes its way towards towards them but slips on the stone and falls. Then it picks it up and simply stares at it. The two then suspect that maybe the spirit energy released from the stone is now powering the robot since his batteries were dead before. Later, we see the actor from the beginning of this chapter on some kind of TV show. The host praises the actor who's on the rise, and he says it's all thanks to his peridonite stone. He says he can't keep it all to himself and wants to break it up. Seeing as it's harder than diamond, the dude straight up pulls out a handgun hoping to break it by shooting it. He fires the gun, and on the final panel of the chapter, we simply see a large building up in flames. It says, "That day a famous TV station melted and collapsed due to a massive explosion of energy. Since there were no survivors, no one will ever know what happened." Chapter 4 begins with another explosion, and once again the building seems to have melted and caved in. Barachi is seeing a doctor about potentially getting rid of her strange birthmark when suddenly a nurse comes in a panic, saying victims from the recent explosion are inbound and they need all hands on deck. The burns on the victim's skin are pretty unusual, having a circular pattern repeated across the body. Barachi relays this to Taburo, who says that her description sounds similar to the burn marks that they received at her apartment the night they hammered the stone. In the background, the robot Piton is hanging from the ceiling. I guess he's still trying to kill himself, and I have to say it's pretty hilarious the idea of a robot trying to hang himself unsuccessfully. It's also interesting that even a month later the robot is still moving, meaning that the spirit energy is quite a power source. Barachi gets a call from her jeweler friend saying that the police are coming to question her. They've traced the explosions back to the peridonite, and he says they'll likely confiscate the stones. They decide to run, and the creepy ass robot is standing there with the noose hanging around his neck. Meanwhile, Maruso, or Kikuchi rather, meets for dinner with the doctor from the hospital she works at, Dr. Suga. She explains that she has been overwhelmed with anxiety and that's why she's been missing so much work. He then invites her to his mountain cottage to relax. Outside, Taburo and Barachi are hiding out in disguise, secretly following Maruso. They think she must know the whereabouts of the real Piton and can help prove their innocence. Barachi also recognizes Dr. Suga as the guy who's treating her birthmark. At the cottage, Dr. Suga tells Maruso that she can stay as long as she wants and that he just wants to see her back to her old self. The two embrace and kiss each other as Taburo and Barachi spy from outside. You can also hear the robot yelling from the trunk. Maruso wakes up in the night feeling more anxious than ever. She notices the doctor is missing and searches the cottage for him. In the basement, she finds a door with a light on the other side. She opens it and dozens of peridonite balls fall out. She finds Dr. Suga inside as well, and he begins to explain himself. One night while he was on duty at the hospital, he found a car parked outside of the emergency room. He looked inside and found the body of Piton. Inside his open stomach, the doctor saw a small portal which the balls were popping out of. On the other side of the portal, he saw another realm made of light. He also says that he spotted Maruso running away that night and begins to question her as to who the man is. Outside, Taburo and Barachi are sitting by a campfire in the woods. Barachi's birthmark begins to itch and starts throbbing in pain. She crouches over and all of a sudden, peridonite stones begin to fall out of her face. Back inside, the doctor leads Maruso to a swimming pool in the lit up room. Inside is something very disturbing, some kind of giant organ. Dr. Suga explains that although Piton's brain was dead, he managed to save his stomach and cultivate the cells to grow them like this. However, the stones have stopped coming out, and he assumes this is because there are none left near the entrance to the other world. Just then, Barachi comes bursting in, demanding that the doctor cut the birthmark off of her face. She pulls her hair back, and we see that her face is now something like an open wound with peridonite flooding out of it. Maruso passes out from the shock and wakes up chained to a table. Barachi is sitting by her, and her entire head is wrapped up in bandages. She says that the surgery on her birthmark is over. Dr. Suga says that her birthmark became a portal to the other world, and even after cutting it off, it produced the stones. We jump forward a month, and today is the day of Barachi's bandage removal. Overall, it looks pretty good, except for a scar down the center of her face, but the doctor says it'll fade over time. In the basement, separate from Piton's stomach, Barachi's birthmark is being cultivated in a giant petri dish, and Maruso simply says that something terrible is going to happen. She can sense it. The next chapter begins with Dr. Suga hiring a man to enter the giant stomach, which now has a trap door attached. I guess he offered the guy a ton of money simply to go inside and investigate. The man is befitted with a diving suit and a microphone to report what he sees. He descends into the stomach and finds the portal to the other world. However, shortly after he enters, the transmission cuts out. They pull the line back up only to find a disgusted melted blob on the end, barely resembling that of the diver. Suga says that sacrifices are inevitable with any new venture, although maybe he rushed this one a bit. He decides he must reach out to the world's leading scientific institutions in order to develop an exploratory drone. Taburo's like, maybe this is a good time to tell you we actually have an advanced robot in our trunk. They grab the Piton robot, and Taburo tells it that there's a door to the other side in the stomach, so if he really wants to die, now's his chance. The robot implores them all to go go in and die together, and Taburo tells them, yeah, they'll come in later. So Piton enters the stomach, and man, imagine trying to explain this sequence to somebody who hasn't read the rest of this thing. A robot that looks like a man climbs into a giant stomach in an attempt to kill himself by entering a portal to the afterlife. Oh, and the stomach is made from the human that built the robot. That's what I love about Junji Ito. His longer stories always end up in incredibly strange places. Piton advances pretty far before the doctor decides to pull him back. The robot lifts his shirt up and a bunch of stones drop out. They all release spirits that fill the room, and Piton explains that he flew around the dazzling world of light picking up the stones. After this, Piton goes back and forth between the worlds many times, and Dr. Suga has named him Spirit World Flyer 1. Barachi has the doctor give her a checkup, and it looks like the scar is healing up well. Then he gives her a makeover and says she looks beautiful before he lays a big smooch on her. Barachi asks about Maruso, and the doctor says he's no longer interested in her since she's mentally unstable. Taburo realizes what's going on and says he's sick of being a third wheel. He decides he's gonna leave since they've been cleared of the terrorism charges anyway. On his way out, he goes to say goodbye to Maruso, and she does look pretty crazy. She's trembling and keeps saying that something terrible is going to happen to them all. Taburo takes off, calling them all a bunch of loonies, and as he drives, he notices a figure walking down the road. This figure looks just like him, and this isn't the last time he sees his doppelganger either. Barachi visits Maruso in her room just to brag about how the doctor loves her now and that they're getting married soon. Maruso once again says that something horrible is going to happen, and Barachi just laughs at her. The doctor says he wants to show Barachi something and leads her to a dark room where he's been cultivating her birthmark. This monstrosity recently opened up into another portal. He says he wanted Piton to explore it as well, but that the robot refused, saying that this gate belonged to Barachi. Later, Dr. Suga has invited some VIPs and engineers to see his work. He demonstrates by having Piton enter the stomach and collect peridonite stones, but some of the people think it's some kind of trick or gimmick. Next, Barachi dives into the birthmark portal. The doctor explains that this is only possible because it is made from her own body tissue. A half hour later, Barachi emerges from the gate, but her face is all mutilated and one of her eyes is missing. She starts to claw her way out until her head just straight up explodes. Springs and gears go flying, and Barachi's body seems to be made up of metal and wiring. What the hell's going on? That concludes chapter 5. Now let's move into the final chapter of Black Paradox. It begins with Dr. Suga and Barachi laying in bed discussing how much of a disaster the meeting was. They explained that they had ordered a robot replica of Barachi from the same team that designed Piton's, so it's unclear why this one melted while Piton survived. Suga asks her if she would consider entering the portal herself, but she refuses. That night, Suga sneaks off into Maruso's room, and she's fully catatonic at this point. He tells her that there's no reason to be anxious as a bright future awaits humanity. He believes that the peridonite's energy will likely bring salvation to Earth. He then says he loves her and starts making out with her. Extra creepy, dude. Barachi walks in and catches him in the act. She leaves, and Dr. Suga finds her pouring kerosene all over the birthmark portal and threatening to burn it. But Suga distracts her long enough to push her in. We see her disappear into the other realm. Later, Suga has taken Maruso to get an MRI and discovers there to be a strange tumor in the center of her brainstem. Suga believes the tumor to be another gate to the other side and asks the surgeon to try and remove it. We also learn that Suga has been working with a space agency team to develop a new peridonite mining machine. Surprisingly, this machine is lasting longer within the portal, and they can even see through the camera. The machine is moving toward a vein of peridonite, but then a black figure appears on screen. Right before the screen cuts out, we see Barachi alive and flying toward the camera. They pull the probe up to find it completely melted. Then suddenly Barachi jumps out of the hole behind it. She pulls a stone out of her robe and throws it to Suga, who then congratulates her on becoming Spirit World Flyer number 2. Suga then tracks down Tarubo. His servant tells Suga that Tarubo has been afraid of his own shadow. As of late, he's locked himself in his room in the dark and is speaking nonsense, like saying that his shadow glows in the dark. Dr. Suga enters the dark room and finds a glowing shadow on the wall. Looking closer, he sees this is actually another gate to the other side, and Taburo comes flying through it. Later at the cottage, Suga talks to Maruso. Post-surgery, she seems to be completely calm. Suga then shows her his new project. He's been cultivating Maruso's tumor in a massive tank. She says, "Let me guess, you want me to enter into paradise and return with the peridonite for the sake of humanity." She says she's not afraid at all and wonders why the old her was so frightened. She agrees to jump in, but does wonder if this truly is for the sake of humanity. She dives in, and after this, we're told the world has peridonite fever and that the spirit elements of the mineral have caused a sensation. Recently, however, peridonite rapidly disappeared from the market and has been placed under the control of the government. There's a rumor, however, that in a secret base in the mountains, there's a group called Black Paradox, and that this group is still bringing the minerals in from the spirit world. We see Taburo, Maruso, Piton, and Barachi sitting together in the cottage wearing all black. It seems like the four have finally passed on to the other side like they originally set out to do all that time ago, but they never dreamed they'd be traveling back and forth between the worlds like this. We learn that since Maruso has come back from the other side, she can now see the future. The vague sense of terror she once had has become a clear vision of the future. She says that humanity will progress by leaps and bounds thanks to the new energy source. She also says that people will slowly begin to disappear as the energy they're using is actually their own souls. She says if you don't want to disappear, you better find your own soul. Tarbo asks if it's really possible to save your own soul in the future, and Maruso says that Piton has already done so. The spirit energy that entered his robot body was actually his. Barachi then realizes that her robot must have failed because it didn't have her soul in it. Maruso then explains the fate of Dr. Suga. She says that the world will celebrate him at first, but eventually he'll be denounced as the downfall of humanity. Just then, Suga comes into the room and says, "Okay everyone, let's get out there today for the sake of humanity." The Black Paradox group then heads out saying, "Let's get going for the future of humanity." And that's Black Paradox. I could stop the video there, but I decided to add 2 extra stories here: Blood Bubble Bushes and Flesh Colored Horror. So let's get into Blood Bubble Bushes. A young couple, Ansai and Kana, are speeding in a car off-road. Kana is getting a little freaked out, but Ansai assures her he's got it under control. Suddenly something hits the windshield, covering it in blood. Ansai loses control of the car and they spin into a tree, but luckily make it out unscathed. They assume they hit a bird of some sort, but wonder how it could cause so much blood to spray all over the windshield. The car won't start and the couple are forced to go it on foot, hoping to find a telephone somewhere. After an hour of walking, they spot a small hut and assume there must be some houses nearby. Inside the hut, they find a group of young boys huddled together and they look a little weird. The boys don't say much other than there's no phone nearby. Ansai asks them how to get to the main road and they just laugh. He calls them brats and the couple continue on their way. But after a while, they notice that they're being followed by the kids. They suddenly move in fast with little whips and attack the couple. At the sight of blood, the kids begin salivating and we see what looks like vampire fangs in their mouths. They move in trying to lick up the blood and Ansai fights them off until they finally leave. Kana is pretty beat up and disgusted at the fact that those boys actually sucked her blood. Soon they see rooftops and move in to find a beat up abandoned village. Something's really off here and it looks like there's blood stains on some of the buildings. They find a pool of blood on the ground and looking closer, it actually looks like there's skin or something in it. Gross. They find that there's a trail of blood leading from the puddle and begin to follow it. It leads to the door of a large mansion and a young man actually opens it up to greet them. The couple explains their situation and the young man says it must have been those brats again. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a phone but invites them in to help patch up Kana. He offers to let them stay the night and even gives them food. He says he moved into this village after it was abandoned and that it was due to him having some emotional troubles. He says that Kana reminds him of a person, the most important person in his life, and he tells them about her. He says that this woman was very lonely and seemed to push everyone away. One day she had a cut on her wrist and even said that her blood wants to leave her. One night the young man caught the woman cutting her throat but stopped her before she did any major damage. He then drank the blood from her neck for some reason and the two confessed their love to each other. Soon after this, something strange happened. The wound on her neck grew out like tree branches and at the end were little fruit filled with blood. The woman says that soon all the blood will leave her body and eventually her skin shriveled up as more fruit grew out of her body. I thought this dude was gonna say he had a bad breakup or something. I didn't expect this crazy shit. Later, Ansai wakes up, although he doesn't remember going to sleep. In fact, he thinks there might have been something in his drink and that he passed out. He searches the house and finds the young man sucking the blood out of Kana's neck before leading her somewhere in the dark. Ansai finds a trail of blood and follows it to a door. When he opens it, he finds a room full of blood bushes. The young man pops up and says that this is actually his lover. He says that he found the abandoned village while looking for a place to bury her blood fruit, but instead more grew out of the ground. He says that the blood the couple found before was probably some stray fruit that grew outside, but he doesn't want that to happen because then those blood-sucking brats will eat them. Ansai confronts him about Kana and the guy says he doesn't know what he's talking about and that he must have dreamed whatever he thought he saw happen. The man leaves and then Ansai hears a voice among the bushes. A decayed body is sticking out of the dirt. It begs Ansai to help him and claims to be the village leader. He says it was the young man that destroyed the village. Using a spell, he turned the villagers into blood plants. He says that the young man has Renfield syndrome and depends on drinking blood blood to survive. Soon all the villagers will be completely drained, and so he's likely looking for new sacrifices. Ansai asks what the spell is, and the village leader tells him that he will kiss a wound and soon after blood bubbles will grow from it. He also says that the only way to stop the curse is to eat your own blood fruit. However, once you do, you'll then lust for blood yourself. Apparently this is what happened to the boys from earlier, as well as several other villagers. Ansai returns upstairs to find Kana in the room. He grabs her and they try to escape, but the man finds them and says it would be a shame if they got out. Then Kana's neck begins sprouting a blood bush. Ansai pounds on the front door and almost gives up when suddenly an axe tears through the wood. It's the boys. They bust through the door and run straight for the blood bubble room and begin eating it like it's a buffet. A mummified villager looks at one of the boys and says, "Do you still remember me? I'm your father." The boy just sprouts a sinister smile and begins pulling the blood fruit straight off his father's head to eat. Damn, kid. Suddenly, the kid gets a pitchfork through his back from the young man. Outside, the couple has managed to make it a good distance from the village, but Kana's neck has only gotten worse. Ansai looks down and finds that his hand is now sprouting the bubbles as well. On the final page, we see Kana eating one of her own fruit, now sealing her fate as a bloodsucker. And we end it there. Flesh-colored horror. A woman named Momoko is walking home at night when she sees a figure walking behind her. Suddenly, the figure throws a bucket of some unknown substance on her that stinks really bad. When she gets home, she finds the stuff is hard to remove and burns. She manages to get it off her body, but her hair is hopeless and she's forced to cut it off. We learn that she's a kindergarten teacher, and the next day, all her students make fun of her hairstyle. Damn, these kids are rude. On the playground, some kids have an argument, and one of them, named Chikara, looks messed up like he has some kind of skin condition or something. He scratches another kid and Momoko scolds him. She says that he's a big troublemaker with violent tendencies. The same day, he randomly starts trashing the other students' artwork. Then he asks some of the other kids if they want him to peel the skin off their faces. Damn, this kid is creepy. Momoko decides it's time to speak to Chikara's mother and starts up a conversation at pickup. She explains to the woman his crazy behavior, and we learn that this is actually not his mother, but his aunt who lives with them. The aunt invites Momoko over to talk to his real mom. Chikara's mother answers the door visibly wet, saying she just got out of the bath. The house is a disaster, and she explains that Chikara rips up the wallpaper and furniture constantly. Momoko says that the woman is pretty off-putting and that she spoke with no expression on her face. Later, we learn that Chikara has been acting up again, attacking other students, and their parents are getting pretty pissed. That day on the playground, Momoko finds one of her students a bloody mess. Apparently, Chikara straight up peeled the skin off the kid's face. My god, he actually did it. After this, Chikara is finally expelled, but he keeps showing up to school to scare the other kids, staring in through the window like a creep. One day, he even follows Momoko to her apartment building, and she invites the kid in, feeling bad for him. Her father, a doctor, stops by since he was in the neighborhood and gives Chikara a good look over. He notes that the kid's skin is getting thinner and that his fingerprints are even gone. Momoko then drags the boy to his house, and once again, his mother seems to have just gotten out of the bath. Momoko tells her about Chikara's skin and recommends seeing a specialist, but his mother just shrugs it off, saying it's not that serious and that he'll be a handsome boy soon enough. After Momoko leaves, we see Chikara's mother and aunt working on some kind of formula. They've apparently failed in making this concoction several times, but hopefully this time it'll work. Chikara's mother then sticks a hose in his mouth, lays him on a table, and starts lathering his body up with the sticky liquid. Eventually, his entire body is covered in it, and I guess the hose was just so he could breathe. They then begin ripping the stuff off his body, and she says that it should take effect in an hour. They check again after the hour passes, but no good. Whatever was supposed to happen didn't. Chikara's aunt says they really should stop trying because she doesn't want Chikara to suffer any longer. Every time they try, they peel off some of his skin, which is why he looks like that. His mother says she just wants to show his true beauty. She just goes crazy saying she wants to see it over and over and destroying the wallpaper. Later, Momoko witnesses an attack that looks just like what happened to her, with someone throwing a bucket of muck on an innocent passerby. She chases the culprit down and discovers that it's actually Chikara's aunt. She explains that the formula is a beauty medicine originally developed by Chikara's father before he died. Chikara's mother used the formula on herself and attained the beauty she wanted, but wasn't satisfied and now wants Chikara to experience the same thing. The aunt says she's been trying to save Chikara from the results by using the wrong ingredients, but the process is still destroying Chikara's skin. Elsewhere, we see a dark figure in a cloak flash a passing salaryman and ask him if she's beautiful. The guy screams and runs like he just saw something terrifying. Next, the figure appears behind Momoko and bashes her head with a rock. She wakes up in Chikara's house to his mother giving a backstory. She says that her husband was an alchemist attempting to create a potion of eternal youth. Finally, thinking he created it, he tried the formula himself, but an hour later he saw the results and they were so horrific that he died of shock. She says that she found his transformed body beautiful, and we see that once again she's attempting to make the formula, but she accidentally drops a bottle of acid on her leg. She yells at her sister to get it off immediately, and we soon learn that she doesn't mean the acid. The aunt unzips something on her back, and then her skin falls off her body. Chikara's mother is now standing skinless in the kitchen. Momoko details how disgusting her body is, saying that the muscles wiggled like caterpillars and her legs were covered with white tendons that look like they could snap at the slightest tug. Chikara's mother then commands her sister to clean off the skin suit so it isn't damaged, and she talks about the beauty of bare muscles. She puts on a wig, which just makes her look even more disturbing, and says that she can't live without her skin, unfortunately, because she would dry out if she didn't wear it. She then looks at the spilt bottle of acid and realizes it's actually water. Piecing together that her sister's been messing with the ingredients, she starts chewing out the ant. Meanwhile, Chikara leaves the room and reappears with the actual bottle of acid, helping his mom out. She attempts to grab it from him, but suddenly he kicks the skin suit on the floor and pours acid all over it, burning his mother's flesh. We see it disintegrate as she cries out about her precious skin. The aunt opens a window to let the fumes out, and the skinless mom approaches her, saying this is all her fault and that she'll just have to use her skin now, even if that means ripping it off her body. In an absolutely horrifying image, Chikara's mother rips her sister's face off. Chikara yells out, "Leave my aunt alone," and grabs his mother's leg. This part definitely made me squirm as he rips her leg muscles. Oh, that's disturbing to think about. The aunt actually seems relatively fine, and then she admits that she took the formula 3 years ago, thinking it would make her beautiful. She says that she never meant to use it, but her sister tricked her, and then Momoko faints. And that's how this one ends. Okay, that's all I got for you this week, and I'll be back next time with even more Junji Ito, so stay tuned. I want to say thanks everyone for watching. If you like the intro and outro music that's likely playing right now, go check out Kill Me Katie. And of course, big shout out to my patrons. If you want your name displayed at the end of every video like these fine people, consider joining the Patreon, but I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.